Those of us who have come to understand the truth of God and who have begun to grasp in some measure what God has in store for man, those of us who have seen in the prophets the plan of God, those who have understood through the words of Jesus the plan of salvation, the rescue of man, and the marvelous things that God has in store for us, to such an extent that Paul would say, eye has not seen, ear has not heard, neither has it entered into the heart of man, the things that God has prepared for us. We who have been rescued from the world and given life, we who have a grasp of eternity and a chance to live and work with God forever, wouldn't it be a terrible shame if we came up short and missed the whole thing? You know, it's fair to say that we live a lot of our lives as though that simply is not possible. That the loving God wouldn't let that happen to us. And I surely understand that. And I know there's even a doctrine that basically believes that what is called the security of the believer, in the vernacular, once saved, always saved. And frankly, I would prefer that that's right. And once you have come to that place, that God would never let you go, that He would never, whatever He would have to do, He would do, and that may be true. But we come across a passage of Scripture like the one I want to look at here in Hebrews 4. I think it would be a terrible mistake for us not to read carefully and to think carefully about what this Scripture says. In Hebrews 4 and verse 1, Paul says this, "Let us therefore fear, lest a promise being left us of entering into His rest, any of you should seem to come short of it." The promise is there. And he says, I think we need to be afraid lest we should somehow come up short on that promise. So having said that, I think it might be well for us to try to grasp what on earth he's talking about. Now, the context of his remark begins, well, from the first chapter of Hebrews, verse 1, but for the purposes of this sermon, we'll start with chapter 3, verse 7. "Wherefore, as the Holy Spirit says, today, if you will hear His voice, harden not your hearts as in the provocation, in the day of temptation in the wilderness, when your fathers tempted me and proved me and saw my works for 40 years. Wherefore I was grieved with that generation. And I said, they do always err in their heart, and they have not known my ways. So I swore in my wrath, they will not enter into my rest." So he says we need to be very careful lest we should come short of entering into God's rest. And here he comes back and says, I swore in my wrath, these people will not enter into my rest. What's that about? Well, it's a reference. The reference may not even find it in your margin, I don't know. But it takes us back to Numbers, the 13th chapter. And I think there are some lessons in here that would be very well for all of us who name the name of Christ to understand and to think deeply about. In the 13th chapter of Numbers, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Send men that they may search out the land of Canaan, which I gave to the children of Israel. Of every tribe of their fathers shall you send a man, every one a ruler among them." Now Israel has come out of Egypt. They have seen the plagues in Egypt, the death of the firstborn. By an absolute miracle, they have seen Pharaoh say not only that they might go, but he wanted them out so very badly. These are the people who walked dry-shod across the bottom of the Red Sea, right? They are the people who saw Pharaoh's army pursue into the Red Sea and saw them drowned in the Red Sea, right? These are the people who were led with a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. These are the people whom God fed with manna from heaven. The miracles that were performed for these people again and again and again are truly mind-boggling. And now they come to the place to where they are actually ready. They have marched all the way up to Canaan. They've got the law. They've gone through all the things that led up to it. They've been given water in the wilderness as well as food. And the time has come to make the preparations for the final assault on Canaan. So God says, I want you to send men, somebody out of every tribe. And there are two names in this that are quite familiar. One of them is Caleb, who is a Jew. The other is, interestingly enough, Hoshea of the tribe of Ephraim, who is the son of Nun, whom you and I know as Joshua, the son of Nun. May not have realized it, but his name was the same as the prophet Hosea until Moses changed his name. Moses called him Yehoshua or Yahshua, and hence the name Joshua in our language. So in verse 17, Moses sent these 12 men to spy out the land of Canaan and said to them, "Go up this way south and up the mountain and see the land, what it is, and the people that dwell therein, whether they are strong or weak or few or many, and what the land is that they dwell therein, whether it is good or bad, and what cities they be that dwell therein, whether they're in tents or whether they're in strongholds, and what the land is, whether it be fat or lean, whether there is wood therein or not," which I gather would have been a very important thing to know if you're getting ready to mount an invasion into a land. "And be you of good courage, and bring the fruit of the land." Now the time was the time of first ripe grapes. That makes a certain amount of sense. Even though you know God's going to be going with you, even though you know you're going to command the land, you are still supposed to, as fighting men, do some reconnoitering, find out what's up there, who are we up against, what are the defenses, and so we can make whatever arrangements that we need to make as we go in. Is there going to be sufficient wood there, for example, for us to build a siege engine, if that's what we have to do? Is there going to be enough there to build campfires so we can cook our food? I mean, what is the land like, and what's the food? Now, I think there was a motive in this, in one sense of the word, that when the report would come back, which God full well knew, of what a good land this was. Now, there are some people who, by the way, doubt the report that was given by these scouts that they came back, that land wasn't really that rich in agricultural produce at that time. But there's a contemporary record about that, I think a little earlier than this, from an Egyptian who was run out of Pharaoh's court and went up to Israel and sojourned there for some time, and he wrote an account back to Egypt about what things were like up there. And his account is just as rich in his description of the things that were there as is the account of these men who went up and looked at it when they come back. Well, Moses sent these men up, and so they went up and they marched through the land from the wilderness of Zin to Rehoth and came to Hamath. They descended by the south and came to the city of Hebron, where Ahiman, and gives a bunch of names here. I won't go into all these. And they came to the brook of Eshcol, and they cut down from thence a branch with one cluster of grapes, and they carried it between two of them on a staff, and they brought of the pomegranates and the figs. Now, it's hard to imagine. This, of course, is one of the symbols of the state of Israel. I don't know if you know this or not. Is two men with a staff between them with one giant cluster of grapes hanging from that staff. But that's what they found there. The place was called Brook Eshcol because of the cluster of grapes which the children cut down from there. And they returned from searching out the land after 40 days. So they did a very, very thorough reconnoiter of the land of Israel. Actually, the land of Canaan, I should say, because that was what it was called and known as. And they went and they came to Moses and Aaron, verse 26, and to all the congregation of Israel in the wilderness of Paran, and they brought back word to them and to all the congregation, and they showed them the fruit of the land. And they told him, and they said, "We come into the land which you sent us, and surely it flows with milk and with honey, and this is the fruit of it. Nevertheless, the people who live in that land are strong, the cities are walled and great, and we saw the children of Anak there. The Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, the Hittites, the Jebusites, the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea and the coast of Jordan." They had the whole thing laid out. They knew what tribes were where and the whole thing. And Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, "Let's go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it." Now here was a people, they had come out of the wilderness. They had been to Mount Sinai with God. They were very numerous in nature. They knew that they were coming into the land. They had the command of the situation. And they could bring all their forces to bear wherever they wanted them and whenever they wanted them. The people of the land had to defend their own little territories along the way. And Caleb looked at it and said, "This is well within our means. We can do this, folks. Let's get with it." And of course, the reason, the agriculture, the produce, the land is there. It can support us. It flows with milk and honey. But the men that went up with him, not Joshua, but the other 10, said, "We are not able to go up against the people because they are stronger than we are." And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, "The land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eats up the inhabitants thereof. And all the people we saw in it are men great of stature." In other words, when the land eats up the inhabitants, what they're trying to tell the people is, this is a hard land. It's a hard land. It's a dangerous place. And all the people we saw are men of big stature. They're big guys. And there we saw the giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants. And we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, as we were in their sight. Now, think about that. God brought these people to this place. God himself. God who spoke to them from Mount Sinai, and his voice came rumbling down the side of the mountain and scared all of them slapped to death. They were afraid to go near the mountain with all the power that was there. God who brought them dry shod across the bottom of the Red Sea. I mean, these people had more experience with God than you and I will have in this lifetime. Of what he had done, of his power, of his miracles, of what he could accomplish. And he brings them to this place. And they cannot but know that he has brought them to this place. And then they say, after Caleb saying, look, we can do it. It's there. It's ours. Let's go pluck it like a ripe plum. They said, no, we can't. What is going on in people's minds like this? You know, if you think about this for a moment, this is almost like a slap in God's face. God has gone to all this trouble to get them out of Egypt. God has made all these promises to them. He has proved himself to them again and again and again, and they have every evidence that God would ever want to give anybody at any time. And they still didn't believe him. They didn't trust him. Now, you bring that down to the human level and think about your own relationships with people that you know. If there was somebody to whom you had given all kinds of reasons to trust you, and had never given them any reason not to trust you, and then you ask them to do one slightly difficult thing for you and assure them it'll be all right, and they back away and won't trust you. Well, it is. It's just like a slap in the face. It's an offense. And God was not well pleased with it. In the congregation, chapter 14, verse 1, they all lifted up their voice and they cried. And the people cried that night. And the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, wish to God that we had died in the land of Egypt, or would to God that we had died in this wilderness. Now, you figure that out. What difference does it make if they died in the wilderness or died at the hands of the Amorites? You're dead, you're dead. You might as well go for it. You might as well try something. You might as well have a run at it. Who knows? You might win something. But no, they wouldn't even do that. Wish we had died in Egypt. And why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be a prey? I'll tell you what, folks, I think it would be better for us to go back to Egypt. Did you read the insult? It's right there in front of your eyes. Why has Jehovah brought us into this land to fall by the sword? Just right in his face. They said, okay, let's make a captain and let's return to Egypt. Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of Israel. They knew how serious this decision these people were making. But what's going on here? What's wrong here? Why is this taking place in this way? And why is it the issue that it is? Well, then Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, which were with them in the land, they tore their clothes. The custom of the time in grieving or mourning or humility, or when you've heard a blasphemy, was to tear your clothes, and to cast up dust on your head. Well, they tore their clothes at that point because they realized that what these people had just done was blasphemous. And they spoke to the company of the children of Israel, saying, the land which we passed through to search it is an exceeding good land. If the Lord delight in us, he'll bring us into this land, and he will give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only don't rebel against the Lord. Don't fear the people of the land. They are bread for us. Now, these are a couple of men who have, brought their swords along with them. They're ready to go. They're fighting men. They say, look, they're big, but they will be bread for us. Their defense is departed from them. And the Lord is with us. Don't be afraid of them. And all the congregation bade stone them with stones. They're ready to kill them. The two men out of the group that said, look, we can get this thing done. We can fight them. We can win. They'll be like bread for us. In fact, with bread, the bigger the loaf, the better. Well, they were ready to be stoned with stones, and at that moment, the glory of God, the Shekinah, appeared over the tabernacle, which probably stopped everything. Before all the children of Israel, they could all see it. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will this people provoke me? And how long will it be before they believe me? And you see, this is what's at stake. It is a question of belief, a question of trust as to why in the world will these people not trust me. Now, I want you to think about something for a moment. Supposing you had been among the people who were standing there, and you heard the report of the land, sounded exciting and good to you, And then you heard the story about these giants, these sons of Anak, these huge people, and your heart went weak as water inside of you, and you were scared to death. And even though your knees were knocking, you said, okay, if God says go, we'll go. Does the fact that you have fear, does the fact that you have a doubt in your mind about the outcome of this situation mean that you are a person who is of unbelief? No. No, not at all. Because the question of being of unbelief has to do with what you're willing to do. In other words, you put your trust in God when you go in the face of doubt. When you go with certainty, there is no faith involved, is there? I mean, if you absolutely know the outcome, how much faith does it take to take a chance? You aren't taking a chance. Faith only exists in the face of doubt, folks. And God's criticism of these people was that having those doubts, they acted on their doubts instead of acting on their trust in God. So the fact that you at some moment of time are afraid, at some moment of time you really doubt whether God really will get you through this or not, if you are still willing to place your trust in Him, if you're still willing to go with Him, still willing to obey His law, still willing to do what He says, even though the fear is there, God will honor that. It reminds me of the man who came to Jesus on one day for his child to be healed, and Jesus said, well, if you believe with all your heart, you may be healed. And he said, Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. And that's the state that most of us find ourselves in most of the time. We have belief up to a level, but we have not been able to overcome the doubts. We have not been able to put away the fears. But the question is, are you going to take counsel of your fear, or are you going to take counsel of God? Which one of those are you going to follow? That is where the question comes down. How long, God said, will this people provoke me? And how long will it be before they believe me for all the signs that I have shown among them? And you know, something comes to mind here. I think a lot of us think that we would find it easier to believe God if He would do a miracle. Call down fire from heaven. Part the waters for us. Suddenly, heal somebody who has been sick, some man that's been born blind. If we could just see these miracles, that we would suddenly believe God. And the lesson that I read here is no. That doesn't mean you're going to believe God. Your mind will see them, and you will weigh them, and you will be impressed by them, but they do not guarantee that you are going to believe in this sense, that having seen a miracle, having seen a man, for example, walk on absolutely air across a chasm, does not mean that you are going to be able to put your feet out there and walk across that same chasm. The fact that you have seen miracles will not create faith. Faith comes about because you come to know God and you believe God. And you come to the kind of faith that says, well, I think He will get me across that chasm, but if He doesn't, I'm going out there anyway. It's the same faith that was shown by Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. It says, God will deliver us out of your fiery furnace, but be it known to you, even if He doesn't, we're not going to bow down and worship your idol. Even if He doesn't. So you believe that God will probably do this, but even if He doesn't do it, He's your God, and you've got to do what He said. That's what we're talking about here. God says, I'm going to smite them with the pestilence and disinherit them. I will make of you a greater nation, mightier than they are. And Moses came back with one of those great speeches of his where, it's really hard when you think of this man as being meek to realize how much courage, how much sheer, raw courage this man had. And maybe part of the courage came about because he knew God. I mean, this is a man who had talked to God face to face, even apparently, and knew God. And he said, well, if you do this, the Egyptians will hear of it, that you brought them up out of Egypt with a mighty hand, and they will tell it to the inhabitants of this land, for they have heard that you, the Lord, are among this people, that you, Jehovah, are seen face to face, that your cloud stands over them, and that you go before them by day in a pillar of cloud and a pillar of fire by night. Now, if you kill all these people as one man, then the nations who have heard of the fame of you will speak, saying, well, God failed. He wasn't able to bring it off. That's what it say. Jehovah failed. He couldn't bring it off. He's no bigger deal than Moloch or Dagon or Baal or any of the rest of them out there. He couldn't do it, so he's killed them all in the wilderness. So I beseech you, let the power of my Lord be great, according as you have spoken, saying, the Lord is long-suffering, of great mercy, forgiving iniquity and transgression, and by no means clearing the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation. Pardon, I beseech you, the iniquity of this people, according to the greatness of your mercy, as you have forgiven this people from Egypt all the way to here. Oh, yeah, I had to forgive them every day. You've forgiven them this far, I pray, pardon them one more time. And the Lord said, I have pardoned according to your word. I mean, here is a man who could stand up to God and get God to change his mind. Because don't make any mistake about it, God was not bluffing. God was ready to do precisely what he said he would do. Wipe them out with a pestilence. And he goes on to say that having said that, as truly as I live, all the earth shall be filled with the glory of the Lord, because all those men who have seen my glory and the miracles that I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have tempted me now these 10 times and have not listened, they will not see the land. And this begins the 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, because all those people who went through that would have to die off in the wilderness and would never ever get to enter the promised land. Actually, it was those young men from 20 years old and upward who would die. And only those who were 20 down would actually live to enter into the land of Palestine. Doubtless, he said in verse 30, you shall not come into the land concerning what I swore to you to make you dwell therein, except Caleb and Joshua, the son of Nun. Your little ones, you said, will be a prey. I'll bring them in, and they shall know the land which you have despised. But as for your carcasses, they shall fall in this wilderness, and your children shall wander in the wilderness 40 years, and bear your whoredoms until your carcasses are wasted in the wilderness. After the number of days in which you search the land, even 40 days, each day for a year, shall you bear your iniquity, even 40 years, and you shall know my breach of promise. Well, it's really sad, isn't it, to see that happen? But immediately after this, a funny thing happened. The people heard this, they were shamed by it, and they decided that they would go up after all. So they decided to charge up. Early in the morning, they rose up. They got to the top of the mountain, and they said, look, we're here, and we'll go into the place which we promised, for we have sinned. And Moses said, what are you doing? Why are you transgressing the commandment of the Lord? This isn't going to work, folks. God said, don't go. You're going to stay out here. He's actually already said what he's going to do, and now you're even going to go contrary to this. They could never get it right. They could never get it right. Go not up. God's not among you. Well, they went up, and they were smitten, killed, scattered, and run off by the Amalekites, just like Moses said they would be. Now, if you'll turn back to Hebrews chapter 3 again, I'd like to return to this, because this is what he's talking about when he says, as I swore to them in my wrath, they will not enter into my rest. Hebrews chapter 3. Take heed, he said. Actually, in verse 11, I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. Then he says, take heed, my brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. Now, there's something you need to know about King James English, and translations and so forth. Nowadays, we in our language, the modern English, the word evil carries a particular denotation and connotation that is somewhat different from this. That we would tend to think of ourselves as saying, well, no, I don't have an evil heart. I have my weaknesses, I have my problems, I make my mistakes, but you could never describe me as having an evil heart. And in modern English, I would agree with you entirely. This is really a bad translation. But probably what it should say is, take heed, brethren, lest there be in any of you a hurtful heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. That having learned all the stuff that we have learned, having known all the stuff that we have known, we need to pay careful attention, lest there somehow come into us an adverse heart, a heart that is not able to believe and not able to trust and not able to follow along in the way that God has given us. Because There are so many commandments that we know and we understand, we grasp, we deal with. We focus on this one or that one depending upon our own proclivities, but you've got a lot of them there, like you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor, you shall not steal, you shall not covet your neighbor's house, nor his wife, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is your neighbor. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind and all your strength. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the earth. All these things are given to us, and all of us know that at one time or another, these commandments are going to create problems for us. They're going to create problems because they are going to come up against something we want. They may come up against something we need. They may come up against something we hope for and have dreamed about. They may come up against a situation that actually causes us to suffer loss in order to keep the commandment. All of us know that we will face those questions from time to time. And all of us know that we have faith at a certain level. We believe God at a certain level. But there are times when we doubt. There are times when we fear. But more than that, there are times when we, without really coming to grips with it, run counter to a commandment of God when at some level of consciousness we know that that's what we're doing. Now, there's a difference between a deliberate and willful sin and a sin through weakness even when you know that you are doing the thing through weakness that you are doing. But at the same time, there's this warning that comes up. That what is turning out to be in you is a heart that is what he would call here an adverse heart or a hurtful heart of unbelief in departing from God and not listening to God, not heeding God, not accepting God, not accepting what it is He's told you that you are supposed to do at whatever level it is. It is a creeping unbelief. Now, for God to deal with you when you are in a state of unbelief, He cannot. Let's create two ideas in your mind here. One of them is doubt, which is normal, and the other one is unbelief, which means I don't trust God. Now, you may not be saying that with your mouth, but you may well be saying it with your life because you do not place your trust in Him. Think back to the illustration I gave you a while ago. You're in the group when these guys give their report, and even though you are scared to death, even though you figure you're probably going to get killed, your response to Caleb and Joshua and Moses is, let's go do it. That is not unbelief. But if your statement is, well, we're just going to go up there and get killed, and I'm not going to go, that is unbelief. And if you face it, you face the challenge on it almost every day of your life, in small ways and great, as you work your way through life, facing decisions that many of which are governed by a revelation of God as to right and wrong. One of His commandments, one of His instructions. It may have been an instruction He gave to Israel of old, which nevertheless, even though we're not Israelites or think we aren't, nevertheless it gives us an idea of how God expects man to deal with his fellow man. We really ought to be doing that. We should trust God enough to know that His laws of liability for conduct, that His laws of the way we deal with people, His laws about the way we take care of the poor, we ought to trust God enough to know that these are expressions of God's will for the way man deals with man, and we ought to try with every part of our being to follow those things that God says for us. Because it is an expression of faith and of confidence in Him that we believe that if we do that, it will be well with us. Because God has told us that if we do it, it will be well with us. Well, God warns us about that. He says in verse 13, exhort one another daily while it is called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. There's a beautiful little two-word expression, or a short expression in here that I think is really important. It is exhort one another. There's a lot in that. There is, for example, the assumption of an assembly or a gathering of God's people, isn't it? Because for us to exhort one another, we've got to be together. We have to meet, have to look at one another, shake hands. And I've got to sit for a while and listen to you tell me about the times that your struggles and the struggles you're going through in your life. And when I get through hearing you tell me about the struggle you're facing and the decision you have to face, I say, well, I'll tell you what. Let me tell you what happened to me. Years ago, when I faced this decision about whether I would do this or not, I took it in prayer to God. I prayed for a couple of weeks about it before I finally came to it. And one day, I realized this is what I have got to do. I did it, and I have never looked back. God's blessed me for it, and He'll bless you for it too. This is the value, what Solomon says back in Ecclesiastes, that If one man's all by himself, he's going to get cold. But two who sleep together can be warm. A threefold cord is not easily broken. And he develops this idea of, don't think, no man is an island. You can't stand out there by yourself. You need help. You need encouragement. You need exhortation. And one of the purposes of you people coming and sitting and listening to me today is that I may exhort you in these areas. And you may exhort one another as we talk and as we share the problems and the struggles that we have in life and the struggles we have in believing God. Right here in almost a backhanded way is the assumption of a fellowship of God's people. And later on, this same writer will tell us, don't forsake the assembling of yourselves together as the manner of some is. Why? Because we need to be there to stir one another up to love and to good works and to remind one another, both by example and by word, of right conduct. In fact, in the process of exhorting your brother to do the right thing, you give yourself a little stiffening up the backbone to do the right thing. Because it's awfully hard when you've told someone else what he ought to do to go do something else yourself. He goes on to say that we don't want to be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin because we are made partakers of Christ if. Conditions, they keep cropping. It's amazing how much there is in the Bible of if then, if then, if then. You find them in Proverbs, you find them in Psalms, you find them all through the Bible. It's remarkable. We are made partakers of Christ if we hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast to the end. What that means is we are partakers of Christ if the decisions you make today reflect what Jesus Christ has taught you. This is said 100 ways in the New Testament, in the Old Testament as well. As Jesus said, he that hears my words and does them is like a man that builds his house on a rock. The man that hears my words and doesn't do them is like a man that builds his house on the sand. What decisions are you facing? What is there hanging out there before you? What is there of God's instructions that you think you might get around to doing someday and you haven't started on yet? What challenge is it that you face that you know you've got decisions to make and you haven't decided what that decision will be? Do you know what God instructs you? Do you know what God promises you? Oh, sure. The problem is making your mind up that you have to do it. I can't tell you how many times, as a minister and a counselor, I have people call me or come to see me and they sit down and they want to get some advice on something that they're getting ready to do. And they will talk to me about this problem. And they'll run through the whole rigmarole with me and I will say, well, tell me something. What do you think you ought to do? And they will tell me. And they are right. Almost all the time. And I used to, when I was a lot younger minister, I would say, well, now, that's right. You know why are you asking me this? I don't ask that anymore because I know why they're asking me this. They want to share the responsibility for it. They don't want to carry it all by themselves. They want some kind of reassurance along the way. Well, in a lot of ways, that's what we are here for, folks. When I say we, I don't mean we ministers. I mean we brethren are here for. It is to give people reassurance, to help them to do the right thing that they know to do. It isn't necessarily that someone comes along and says, I don't think this is what I ought to do. And we say, oh, yes, I think it is. Most of the time, the right course of action is clear to the person who's asking the question. They just have not been able to make themselves do it yet. But you see, it is only in the doing of it that faith ever comes into existence. It can only exist in action. As you do, as you move. And if you are kind of thinking, well, I really believe in God and I really trust God, but you're not moving, that's not faith. That's not even close to faith. Well, he continues to say, while it is said today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts as in the provocation. While it is said today, well, here's another one of those warnings that tells us, don't delay, do it now. Because all the time that you sit and think about it, all the time that you ponder it, all the time you drag this burden around with you, you have made a decision not to do it. You only make the decision to do it when you act. There is no such thing, really, as indecision. Indecision is a vote in the wrong direction. And you should also know that you have no chance of winning at all when you don't decide. When you decide, you can flip a coin on a decision, and you've got a 50-50 chance of being right. You don't move, you have no chance at all. Some, when they had heard, did provoke. However, not everyone that came out of Egypt with Moses But with whom was he grieved for 40 years? It was with those people who sinned, whose carcasses fell in the wilderness. And to whom did he swear that they would not enter into his rest, but to those who wouldn't believe, who wouldn't trust, who wouldn't grab their swords, who wouldn't grab their shields, who wouldn't organize themselves into ranks the first day that Caleb got back and said, hey, we're burning daylight, let's get up there and let's get this job done. Let's get on the way, the land is there, let's take it. That's belief. I don't care if they're afraid. Any man going into combat is afraid if he is sane. Courage exists in the face of fear. Faith only exists in the face of doubt. So we see they could not enter into the land because of unbelief. They just flat would not place their trust in God. And that brings us to that verse I started out with. Let us therefore fear, lest a promise being left us of entering into his rest, any of you would seem to come short of it. This seems to me to be a warning to Christians that just sits right parallel to the warning that was given to ancient Israel. That there is always a chance for you to turn back. That you at any given point in time have it within your grasp to make the decision to go back into Egypt at any time. You hate to think about that, but the lessons in the Bible hit you with it again and again and again. And we all understand the metaphor, don't we, of Egypt in the wilderness wanderings and entering into Canaan? That Egypt is a type of sin, that the deliverance from sin has to take place by a miracle, that you come out of sin, you walk through the waters of the Dead Sea, which is a kind of a baptism, the Red Sea, and you come out the other side and you get instructions on the other side of baptism as to how to live your life. They're called the Ten Commandments and the Law of God. And then because of our struggle with faith, we wander around in the wilderness for 40 years, struggling with the world, struggling with the elements, and struggling with everything until finally we come to Jordan, which is metaphorically the dividing line between this life and the kingdom of God. Crossing Jordan, Canaan, the happy land of Canaan. Canaan was not a happy land. That was a land where a bunch of savages lived. Canaan was a miserable, rotten place as far as their society was concerned. But the name Canaan in hymnology and elsewhere is a symbol for the kingdom of God because it's crossing Jordan into the promised land. This is the parallel for the Christian, is crossing the barrier between this life and the next and entering into the kingdom of God. The man writing Hebrews, we presume is Paul, lays all this out before us in parallel and says, to you people who are Christians, I say, you really need to fear, lest having been given a promise of entering his rest, any of you should seem to come short of it. Because you have the capacity of making the same mistake those stupid people did back then. For unto us was the gospel preached, as well as unto them. But the word preached did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in them that heard it. They just wouldn't place their trust in it. They would not step on it. For as we have believed to enter into rest, as he said, I have sworn in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. Though the works were finished from the foundation of the world. This section of Hebrews is extremely difficult in the Greek and in the translation. He spoke in a certain day of the seventh day on this wise. And God did rest the seventh day from all his works. And this place again, shall they enter into my rest? What the writer of Hebrews is doing, he's making a comparison between the Sabbath day and the rest of God. The Sabbath day and the kingdom of God. The wilderness wandering is the time of living in this world, like 6,000 years that we'll do it. And this seventh day, the 7,000 years or the millennium, is on the other side of Jordan in the promised land, drawing that comparison. Seeing therefore it remains that some must enter, and they to whom it was first preached could not enter. Again, he limits a certain day, saying to David, today, after so long a time, today, if you will hear his voice, don't harden your hearts. There's a proverb that says, he that being often rebuked hardens his neck, shall in the end be suddenly destroyed, and that without remedy. What the Bible tells us again and again is, folks, that God is patient, long-suffering, and merciful, but that there is an end to it. There is a point of no return. And for all of us, one of the greatest lessons that we could ever learn is the simple and three simple words, do it now. Isn't it? We ought to put it on the walls of our offices. We ought to have it on the wall of our garage where we go in and sit in a mess and we start to work immediately cleaning it up. We ought to have it in our sock drawer, do it now, clean the thing up. We can postpone anything. We'd postpone our own funerals if we could do it. But the fact of the matter is that whenever it comes to things of God, Whenever it comes to repentance, when it comes to baptism, when it comes to turning your life around, when it comes to making a commitment, when it comes to obeying God, be it anything from keeping the Sabbath to paying the tithe, the time to start is today. That's why this keeps rolling back on us like this. For if Joshua had actually given them rest, there wouldn't be some conversation afterward about another day. Therefore, there remains a Sabbathing to the people of God. A funny thing about this passage. Everywhere you have seen the word rest up until now, it's been one word. Kataprosin from the Greek. All of a sudden, it now is sabbatismos, which means it's like taking a word and putting ing on the end of it, a Sabbathing or Sabbath keeping for the people of God. For he that has entered into his rest, he has also ceased from his own works, as God did from his. Let us labor to enter into that rest, lest any man fall after the same example of unbelief. For the word of God is quick and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the dividing asunder of soul and spirit and joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. And there is no creature that is not manifest in his sight. Everything is naked and open in the eyes of him with whom we have to do. What does all this mean to you today? It does not mean that if you have faith, you will never doubt. Because the fact is, we all know better than that by now already. What it does mean is that you must not take counsel of your doubts. If the men of Israel had swallowed their fears and gone forward, they would have made it, they would have survived, they would have entered the land and their children with them. We have to live our lives in the confidence that what God says is right is right. It is just, to you, this means that on a day-to-day basis, it is too easy to occupy yourself with the practicality of life and to worry yourself over what works and what doesn't work, and your own means and your own methodology and what you're capable of doing and what you're not capable of doing. And I can't tackle that. I'm not good enough. Or I can't tackle that. I'm not strong enough. I can't live up to that. I don't have enough faith. All the things that you can think about what you can do. We have a temptation to immerse ourselves in our own methodology. I mean, I have to sit around and look at myself every once in a while as I do my work in my own office. I could easily get to the place where we are directing our affairs according to the numbers. And we could be fidgeting around all the time with methodology instead of with ministry. We could spend a lot of time kind of manipulating the mailing list and working on people. And I have to think about that all the time because there is a line between reasonable prudence and the way we do things there and coming to rely on manipulation and what we can do, what we can accomplish, what we can make happen along the way. I hope we will never do that. We have to be careful stewards of our resources, but in the end, all those resources come from God. What we have to do is tend to ministry and tend to the gospel. And to you, this means that you, like the men of Israel, have a moment in which to exercise faith. And when that moment is gone, it is gone. So don't play games. When the moment comes to exercise faith, exercise it. Now, today, consult God at every step of the way and follow His lead in faith. There's a scripture that says, trust in the Lord your God with all your heart and don't lean to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him and He will direct your paths. It's easy to understand that in the light of, I got a decision to make, I better go pray and ask for God's guidance. But there's more to that than that. Considerably more. Because an enormous amount of God's guidance for you is contained already in the pages of the Bible. You do not need a voice from heaven. You do not need a miracle. You don't need some happenstance. You don't need to ask God to have the fleece wet in the morning and the ground dry around it. You don't need to say, well, that's not good enough. I want to see the ground wet and the fleece dry the next day. You don't need that. Because what we have at the end of the ages of man is this incredible book in our laps, most of you got out there, called the Bible. And it is full of the Word of God and the counsel of God and the advice of God. Sometimes you can almost forget how much is there. Right now I'm doing new programs on the book of Proverbs on a radio program, and it's just overwhelming. The repeated expressions of the law of God, the will of God, and the way of God that just leap at you from every verse in the book of Proverbs. It's a study of a lifetime. You want to roll your way on the Lord, if you want to show trust in God, you look in the Bible and you find out what God has said. And that's what you do. Pray and study. Not as an end in themselves. I don't know if you think that somehow by prayer and study you create brownie points with God and all of a sudden you're in better shape with God. That's not the point. You pray and study so that as you face the decisions and the crossroads of your life, you will know what God wants. In all your ways, acknowledge Him, and He will direct your paths. Sometimes through circumstances, more often than not, through the written Word. All you've got to do is study the Bible and pray to find the right way to live your life. And when you find it, live it.